She was just a quiet girl behind the counter. No fancy clothes, no family left. Just one of those folks you see every day and never really notice. Until one small moment in a Houston grocery store changed everything. What would you do if you saw an elderly woman being humiliated over a $4 bottle of cooking oil? Grace Thompson didn't hesitate. She stepped forward with nothing but kindness in her pocket. What she didn't know was who that woman really was, or how that one act would set off a chain of events involving billionaires, broken hearts, and a chance at a life she'd long given up on. Stay with me, friend, because this isn't just a story about money. It's about dignity, redemption, and the kind of love that only shows up when you least expect it. This is Grace and the Bottle of Oil.
It was a Thursday morning, just shy of 6:15. The sun hadn't made it up over the rooftops yet, but the heat was already rising off the Houston pavement like breath from the earth. Grace Thompson tightened the laces on her old canvas shoes, the ones with the worn heel and faded stripes, and stepped outside into the quiet. Her walk to work was exactly 1.2 miles. Past the rusted chain-link fence, past the faded Cash for Cars sign, past the diner that used to serve her mama's favorite peach cobbler before it closed last fall. Grace was 22, but you wouldn't know it by the way she moved, steady, quiet, a little too careful. She worked 6 days a week at Franklin's Market. Orange uniform, name tag that barely held on. Folks who saw her stocking shelves or mopping spills probably thought she was just another shy girl with a polite smile. But Grace was more than that. A year ago she'd been in nursing school, top of her class. She had hands like her mother's, gentle, precise, meant for healing. Then came the crash, one drunk driver. One rainy night, 2 funerals, just like that. The bottom fell out. She dropped out of school, took the first job she could find, moved into a tiny back room in an old boarding house on Polk Street where the AC wheezed like an old man in the heat and the window didn't quite shut right. Rent was $435 a month. Grace earned just over $10 an hour. Every dollar had a place. Every day had a plan, and still, every morning, she put on that uniform, smoothed down her hair, and whispered, "Let's try again." Most customers never noticed. They didn't see the way she counted every coin before buying lunch, or how she flinched just a little every time someone raised their voice. She smiled, always smiled, because she'd been taught that kindness wasn't a show, it was a promise. But that morning, that particular Thursday, Grace didn't know that her smile, her quiet strength, and a $4 bottle of cooking oil were about to change her life. It was just past 8 a.m. when the door chimes at Franklin's Market gave their 100th ring of the day. Morning rush had rolled in. Moms with toddlers, old men in baseball caps, tired nurses getting off night shift. Inside it smelled of fresh mop water and refrigerated air, that classic supermarket blend, familiar and cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like mosquitoes in summer. Grace Thompson stood in aisle 6B stacking tomato soup cans just right, labels out, lined perfectly like soldiers on parade. It was silly maybe, but it gave her peace. She liked quiet jobs, no fuss, no spotlight. Just order. In a world that had given her very little of it, then came the voice. I'm so sorry. I must have left my purse at home." Grace froze. Not from fear, just recognition. She knew that voice. Tired, polite, Southern with just a tremble of shame. Grace turned her head, looked toward Register 4. There stood an elderly woman, white-haired, soft-spoken, maybe in her late 60s. She wore a modest blue dress, clean but well-worn. Her slippers made no sound on the polished floor. She held one thing, a small bottle of cooking oil. Lucia, the cashier, rolled her eyes like a teenager caught doing chores. "You're kidding me, right?" she snapped, smacking her gum. "You came all the way here and forgot your wallet?" The woman offered a gentle smile. "Just popped in, sweetheart." "Didn't mean to cause any fuss." Lucia snorted. "This ain't a food bank, ma'am. You want it, you pay." No money, no oil. Shoppers in line started glancing around. No one said a word. One man sighed loudly and switched lanes. The woman looked down, her shoulders shrinking. "I can leave it," she whispered. It's all right. Lucia crossed her arms. Good, because you're holding everybody up. That was when Grace moved. She walked, slow, steady, like she'd been called to church. She didn't raise her voice, but when she spoke, the whole row went quiet. Lucia, she said. Put it on my payroll deduction form. Lucia blinked. Your what? Grace stepped beside the counter. My check. Next week. $4.12, right? Take it out of that. Lucia stared like she'd been slapped. You're serious? Grace nodded. I'm serious. The old woman gasped softly. Sweetheart, that's not necessary. I didn't mean to. Grace placed a hand gently on her forearm. It's all right, ma'am. You're not a bother. It's just a bottle of oil. Lucia let out a huff but scanned the item. The beep sounded louder than usual. Grace took the bottle, slipped it into the woman's thin plastic bag, and tied the handle softly. You go on now, she said. Looks like we've got rain coming in. The woman held the bag close, blinking through what might have been tears, or just Texas humidity. What's your name, dear? She asked. Grace. The woman repeated it slow like a prayer. Grace. That's a name I won't forget. She placed a weathered hand on her chest. My name's Agnes. Agnes Franklin. And what you just did for me today. Well, honey, that ain't small. Grace smiled and nodded. You have a good day now, Miss Agnes. Then she turned and walked back to aisle 6B, back to her soup cans, like nothing had happened. But something had happened, something big, because Agnes Franklin wasn't just anybody. She was the widow of George Franklin, founder of the Franklin Market chain, and more importantly, she was mother to Daniel Franklin, the quiet, private billionaire CEO Grace had never seen before, and by nightfall that very day, Grace Thompson's name would echo through a boardroom she didn't even know existed. And her act of kindness? It was just getting started. The sun was starting to stretch across the sky when Agnes Franklin stepped out of the black town car and onto the stone driveway of her home. Her fingers curled tightly around that little grocery bag like it held something more than just a bottle of oil. And maybe, in a way, it did. Inside the house, it was cool and quiet. Big windows let in the Texas light, filtering through gauzy curtains. Old photographs lined the fireplace mantel. George in his uniform, young Daniel holding a baseball glove too big for his hand. Agnes sat down slow on the living room sofa, placed the bag in her lap, and stared at it like it was whispering to her. That moment stayed with her. The girl, the smile, the calm strength in the middle of a store full of people who looked the other way. Daniel walked in from his office down the hall, a coffee mug in hand. "Mornin', Mama," he said, setting the mug on the side table. He looked her over, brow creased. "You okay? You look like you've seen something." Agnes gave a tired little smile. Not something. Someone. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're back early. Thought you were going to stop by the garden center." "I didn't make it that far," she said, tapping the bag. "Stopped in for a bottle of oil. Forgot my wallet, and ended up meeting a stranger who reminded me that goodness still walks among us." He sat beside her. "I'm listening." Agnes took a deep breath. She worked at the store. Young girl, brown skin, soft eyes. Her name was Grace. She saw what was happening, how that cashier embarrassed me, and she stepped in. Didn't blink, didn't ask for anything, just said, "Put it on my paycheck," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel leaned back, eyes narrowing just a bit. "What's her full name?" "Didn't ask, just Grace. She didn't say much. But it's been a long time since someone looked at me and saw a person, not just an old lady." There was silence for a moment, the kind that sits heavy. Then Daniel stood up. He wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but something shifted in his jaw. "I want to know who she is," he said. "Full name, background. What she wants out of life, where she sleeps at night. I want it by sundown." Agnes looked up, surprised. "Son, don't go scaring that girl." Daniel shook his head. "I'm not trying to scare her, Mama, but you were insulted in a store with our family's name on the door. That cashier's done, but that girl, Grace," he paused, "there's not a lot of people like her left. And I don't want to wait until she's gone to do something about it." Agnes smiled then, a real smile. "She reminded me of your father," she said. Quiet dignity, the kind of person who shows up when no one else will. Daniel nodded. "Then we make sure she knows we saw her." Meanwhile, across town, Grace sat on the back porch of her boarding house, legs tucked under her, sipping on a glass of tap water with a slice of lemon she'd pinched from work. She had no idea what was coming. No idea her name was being written on a notepad by a man with the power to change her whole life. No idea that by the next morning she'd no longer be just another name on the schedule at Franklin's Market. Because sometimes the quiet things, the thankless gestures, the little kindnesses, they echo further than the loudest speeches. And in a house built by generations of privilege, one small act of decency was about to open a door that had been shut tight for years. It didn't take long. By mid-afternoon, Daniel Franklin stood by his office window, sleeves rolled up, his eyes narrowed in thought. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Amma," he said, "I need you to do what you do best." Amma Johnson had worked for the Franklins over 20 years, ex-military, steady. Loyal, sharp as a blade. "Yes, sir," Amma replied. "Name?" "Grace. She works at the Polk Street store. That's all I've got." "I want everything on her." "Understood." Amma didn't waste time. By that evening, he was sitting 3 blocks down from the supermarket in an old Ford pickup, worn jeans, and a Houston Astros cap pulled low. Nothing about him looked out of place. He watched. At exactly 5:06 p.m., Grace stepped out. Her uniform was still neat. Her shoes were worn but clean. She walked with purpose but not hurry. She didn't call anyone. Didn't check her phone. Just walked. Amma followed at a safe distance, keeping to the opposite side of the street. She passed the shuttered diner, turned left at the old church with the missing cross, crossed over to a narrow house that had been converted into rentals. She used a key from a yarn string lanyard and went inside through the side door. Amma wrote down the address, no porch light. One cracked window pane. He made a note. The next morning he was there again. Grace came out at 6:14 a.m. like clockwork, same shoes, same quiet stride. At work, she helped a young mother carry bags. She cleaned up spilled juice in aisle 3 without being asked. She bent down to tie a little boy's untied shoelace, then sent him off with a high five. She didn't act like someone looking to be noticed. She acted like someone who cared. On day 3, Amma stepped into the store. Quiet, observing. He approached the assistant manager with a clipped tone, flashing a mock inspection badge. "I'm verifying internal personnel data," he said. "Grace Thompson, quiet girl." "What can you tell me?" The manager looked up. "One of the best we've got. Shows up early, leaves late. Doesn't complain, keeps to herself." Amma glanced at the file. Name, Grace Marie Thompson. Age, 22. No emergency contact listed. Education, 2 years of nursing school, dropped out. No record of misconduct, clean as a whistle. He walked out, sat in his truck, and took a long breath. That evening, back at the mansion, he handed Daniel a manila folder. Daniel didn't say much, just flipped through the pages. A photograph, an address, job history. "No next of kin. She walks to work every day?" Daniel asked. "Rain or shine," Amma said. "She has no one?" Amma shook his head slowly. "No family, no car. No backup." Daniel leaned back in his chair. His fingers tapped the edge of the folder. "She's been through all that," he murmured, "and still gave something she barely had, just to help a stranger." Amma nodded. "Didn't know who your mother was. Didn't hesitate." Daniel stared at the wall for a long time. "Most people are nice when someone's watching," he finally said. "She was kind when no one was." He stood up and reached for his blazer. "Tell the driver to be ready tomorrow morning." Amma tilted his head. "Where to?" Daniel gave a half smile. Calm, focused. "I think it's time I paid a visit to aisle 6B. The sky was just beginning to turn gold when Grace stepped out of the store that evening. It had been a long day. 2 spills, 3 rude customers, and a cranky freezer that kept beeping for no reason. But she didn't complain. She never did. She walked her usual path home, her canvas shoes brushing through cracked sidewalks and puddles from a late afternoon sprinkle. The street she lived on was quiet. the kind of place where porch lights flicker and the scent of fried catfish drifts through screen doors. She was about 5 houses from her gate when a black car pulled up slowly beside her. Not fast. Not flashy, just enough to make her stop walking. The window rolled down. And there she was, that same older woman. Blue dress. Kind eyes, this time with earrings that sparkled in the dusk light. Grace blinked. "Ma'am?" The car door opened. Agnes Franklin stepped out, graceful despite her age. She carried herself like a woman who had seen the world change a dozen times and still knew how to walk with dignity. "Grace," she said gently, "do you remember me?" Grace nodded cautiously. "Yes, ma'am." "From the market." Agnes smiled, warm and steady. "I've been looking for you." Grace stood still. She glanced left, then right. This felt surreal. I'm sorry. Did I do something wrong?" "Oh, sweetheart, no," Agnes said, walking closer. "You did something right. That's why I'm here." She opened the car door wider. "Would you ride with me for just a short while?" "I'd like to talk." Grace hesitated. The sun was almost down. She was tired. But something in Agnes's voice, gentle, sincere, put her at ease. "All right," she said softly. The inside of the car smelled like lavender and leather. It was quiet, save for the ticking of the turn signal and the hum of the engine. They drove through streets Grace didn't recognize, nicer neighborhoods. Brick houses with white trim, manicured lawns. Agnes finally spoke. "That day at the store, I didn't tell you who I was. I didn't want to. I wanted to see how the world treated me when it thought I was no one." Grace looked down at her hands. She didn't know what to say. "You didn't hesitate," Agnes continued. "You stepped in when everyone else looked away. And you did it with grace, with dignity. My dear, you reminded me what real kindness looks like." Grace swallowed hard. "It was just a bottle of oil." "No," Agnes said, shaking her head slowly. "It was far more than that." They pulled into a wide circular driveway. The house in front of them looked like something from a magazine. Tall windows, ivy on brick, warm porch lights glowing like welcome arms. Grace's breath caught. "This is your home?" she asked. Agnes chuckled lightly. "It is, but tonight it's just a place for 2 women to have a proper talk." They went inside. The living room was cozy despite its size. Bookshelves lined the walls. A fire crackled softly. The smell of peach cobbler lingered faintly in the air. Agnes poured them both a glass of sweet tea and sat beside Grace. "I want to help you," she said. "Not because you asked, but because you didn't." Grace blinked. I don't understand." Agnes took her hand. "My son would like to meet you. He's the one who owns Franklin's Market now. But before he does, I wanted to thank you myself and give you this." She reached over and opened a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a tiny olive branch pendant. "It belonged to my mother," she said. "She wore it every time she helped someone in need. I think it's your turn now." Grace stared at it, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Agnes smiled. "Just know that what you did mattered, and that some doors open quietly, but they still lead to somewhere beautiful." Outside, the Texas night had fallen. But for Grace Thompson, the world had just started to glow. The morning after the visit, Grace woke earlier than usual. She barely slept. Her mind had replayed the ride in that black car a dozen times. Mrs. Franklin's voice, the warmth in her eyes, and that necklace. Delicate as it was, it felt heavier than gold. She touched it now, still nestled in the little box beside her pillow. Outside, the sky was just turning pink. She had 3 hours before her shift. She thought about going back to sleep, but something told her this day would be different. She was right. At exactly 8:45 a.m., just as Grace was wiping down the freezer doors in aisle 4, the store manager called her name over the intercom. "Grace Thompson, please come to the front office." She wiped her hands on her apron, tucked a loose braid behind her ear, and made her way up front. The manager stood by the door, smiling awkwardly. "There's someone here to see you," he said. Mr. Franklin." Grace's heart skipped. Her stomach tightened. She stepped inside, and there he was. Daniel Franklin, Tall, composed, suit sharp as a blade, but his eyes, they were quiet, like his mother's. He stood up as she entered. "Miss Thompson," he said, offering his hand, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Grace took it carefully. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." She did. The room was still. Only the hum of a nearby vending machine reminded them they were still inside a grocery store. Daniel looked at her for a moment, like he was reading more than just her face. "I want to start by saying thank you for what you did for my mother." Grace looked down, flustered. "It was nothing," she said quietly. "She needed help." Daniel smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how rare that is these days." He paused, then leaned forward. "I've read your file. Nursing student, lost both parents, working full-time. No complaints, no write-ups, just quiet consistency." Grace's cheeks flushed. "I'm just trying to make ends meet. That's exactly why I'm here." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "This is an offer," he said, "a real one. I'd like to bring you on as my personal assistant, at headquarters. Better pay. Benefits. A place to live, furnished and private. No roommates. And," he slid a second envelope across the desk, "a full scholarship to finish your nursing degree, online, at your own pace. All expenses covered." Grace froze. It was as if the room had stopped breathing. She blinked. I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Daniel looked her dead in the eye. "Because you gave something you didn't have to a woman you didn't know. That kind of character is hard to find, and harder to ignore." Tears welled up, but Grace held them back. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's what makes you the right one." There was a silence. Not awkward, just full. Grace reached for the envelope, then pulled her hand back. "I'm not finished school," she said. "I don't know how to be an assistant to someone like you." Daniel leaned back, his tone gentle. "Skills can be taught, but decency? You either have it or you don't. And you've got it in spades." Grace stared at the envelope again. She thought about her parents, about the hours spent walking to work, about the cold nights, the leaky roof, the 40-cent instant coffee she stretched over 3 days. I'd like to try," she said, voice shaking. Daniel nodded. "That's all I ask." He stood, offering his hand again. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson." She took it, firm this time. Outside, the morning sun had climbed high over the store. And for the first time in a long time, Grace Thompson wasn't just walking toward another shift. She was stepping into a brand new chapter. Grace's first day at headquarters felt like stepping into another world. The lobby alone was bigger than her entire rental house. Marble floors, glass walls, and an air so cold and crisp it made her fingertips sting. She clutched her new tote bag with both hands, the one they gave her with her name embroidered on it in soft gold thread. She wore her best blouse, the one with the little pearl buttons her mama had sewn on years ago, and ironed slacks that still had a faint crease from the hanger at the thrift store. She was early. 15 minutes early, to be exact. Daniel noticed. He walked past the front desk, nodded at the receptionist, and smiled when he saw her. "Miss Thompson," he said, warm but professional. "Right on time." Grace stood, smoothed her skirt. "Yes, sir." "No need for sir around here," he said gently. "Just Daniel is fine." She nodded, trying to hide how fast her heart was racing. They walked through the halls together. Daniel introduced her to the staff, quietly, respectfully. "This is Grace," he told each one. "She's joining us as my new assistant." There were smiles, polite handshakes, and a few curious glances. By noon, she'd already memorized the phone system, organized the weekly folders, and reminded Daniel about 2 appointments he'd nearly forgotten. She was a fast learner, but more than that, she listened, not just with her ears, but with that quiet presence that made people feel safe, even in a building full of pressure and deadlines. And Daniel noticed. He noticed how she never rushed, how she always knocked before entering, how she called his mother every Thursday at 4 sharp to check in. She didn't try to impress anyone, but somehow she did. They started working later in the evenings, shared coffee in the break room. Sometimes they laughed about little things, how the printer jammed every Monday, or how the receptionist had a different nail color every day of the week. It was easy, natural, but it wasn't just work anymore. One night, as she handed him a manila folder, their fingers touched. It wasn't much, just a second, but enough to stop them both. Grace looked away, her face warm. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sorry," he said, almost a whisper. "It's all right," she replied, softer than usual. Neither of them said more. But something had shifted. That weekend, Grace stayed up late, finishing her first nursing school module. She sent in a quiz at 11:47 p.m., then sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the moon rise over her new apartment. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming. And Daniel. He found himself walking by her desk when he didn't need to, asking about her day, noticing the way she tucked a note into her planner, or how she smiled with her eyes when she was proud of a task done well. His mother noticed too. "Daniel," she said one evening over dinner, "you've got that look again." He smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. "What look?" "The same one your father had," she said, dabbing her napkin. "The one he got when he realized he'd fallen in love with someone who didn't care a lick about his money." Daniel didn't deny it. He just sipped his sweet tea, staring out at the stars. There was something about Grace. Something quiet, something strong, something more. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the boss, or the billionaire, or the son of a legacy. He just felt like a man who'd found someone worth showing up for. And Grace. She didn't know it yet, but her heart was starting to hope again, in a way it hadn't dared to since the day her world fell apart. Friday evening came with a cool breeze and a soft sky, the kind of Texas sunset that turned everything gold for a little while, even the pavement. Grace had just finished tidying up Daniel's schedule for the following week when he stepped into her office. No blazer this time, just shirt sleeves rolled up, looking more like a man than a CEO. "Grace," he said gently, "are you free this evening?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, sir. Yes, Daniel." He smiled at the slip. "There's this little place near the water. Not fancy. Great food, even better hush puppies. I was thinking, maybe we could grab dinner?" There was a beat, not pressure, just a pause full of possibility. Grace nodded, slow. "I'd like that." They left just after 6. Daniel drove the truck tonight. Yes, a truck, old and slightly dusty, with a country music station playing low. He even opened her door, something Grace hadn't seen a man do in years. The restaurant was a small, family-owned place off the river, tin roof. String lights, smelled like mesquite and fried catfish. The kind of place where folks called you darlin', and the tea was always sweet, no matter how much you asked for less sugar. They sat by the window. The waitress, an older woman with bright lipstick and stories in her eyes, smiled when she saw them. "Well, aren't y'all a fine-looking pair tonight?" she said. "Special occasion?" Grace smiled, a little shy. "Just dinner." Daniel looked at her then, like she was the only person in the room, and for the next 45 minutes, they talked. Not about work, not about business, about her dreams. His memories, their childhoods, music, books, and how they both liked their cornbread crispy on the edges. Grace laughed more that night than she had in months. Daniel listened like every word she said was a page in a book he didn't want to end. After dinner, they walked along the water. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth. Daniel stopped under an old oak tree where lanterns swayed above their heads. He turned to her, his voice lower now, softer. "Grace," he said, "I know this might seem sudden, and I don't want to make anything complicated, but I need to say this." She looked up, eyes wide. "You've changed something in me," he said. "I used to go through my days like everything was handled. Business, plans, deadlines. But ever since you walked into my life, I've been feeling more than thinking. And it feels good, feels right." Grace said nothing. The breeze moved her hair slightly, but she didn't move. "I like you," Daniel continued, "not as an assistant. Not because of what you did for my mother, but because of who you are. And if you ever, when you're ready, I'd like the chance to know you outside of boardrooms and briefings." There was silence. Not awkward, not tense, just honest. Grace's throat tightened. She took a deep breath. "I like you too, Daniel," she said, voice just above a whisper. "But I need time." He nodded, without hesitation. "As much as you need." They stood there a moment longer, not holding hands, not making promises, just standing in something honest, something sacred, a beginning. On the ride home, they didn't say much, but everything felt lighter, and that night, as Grace sat in bed staring at the moon outside her new apartment window, she smiled. Not because a man liked her, but because for the first time in a long time someone saw her and stayed. Agnes Franklin had always been a woman of quiet strength. She didn't raise her voice unless someone was about to burn the cornbread, and she didn't speak praise unless it was truly earned. That Sunday afternoon she sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea in one hand and a stack of church bulletins in the other. The breeze rustled the wind chimes gently. The Franklin house sat still, wrapped in the warmth of Texas spring. She'd just clipped the last rose from her garden when she heard the front door open. Daniel stepped out, tie loose, jacket slung over one shoulder. He looked different. Agnes didn't say anything at first. She just watched him cross the porch and take the seat beside her. After a moment she asked, "You gonna tell me about her?" Daniel chuckled, looked out toward the trees. "I think you already know," he said. Agnes sipped her tea, letting the silence linger. "I do," she finally said, "but I want to hear it from you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She's smart, steady, honest in a way that's rare. She doesn't try to be anything more than who she is, and that's more than enough." Agnes nodded slowly. "She doesn't look at you like you're worth a fortune," she said. "No," he smiled. "She looks at me like I'm worth listening to." Agnes looked down at her hands, those hands that had raised a boy, buried a husband, and planted more gardens than most people would see in a lifetime. "When your daddy first brought me home," she said softly, "I wore a borrowed dress and shoes a size too big. His mama looked at me like I was a stray cat. But your father? He just held my hand like it was the only one in the world." She looked up then, her eyes soft. "That's how you look at her, Daniel." He didn't respond, just held her gaze, steady. Agnes took a long breath. "I see who she is," she said, "and I see who you are when you're with her." She reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This," she said, handing it to him, "was your grandmother's. She gave it to me when I married your father. I think it's time it moved forward." Daniel opened the pouch. Inside was a silver brooch in the shape of a magnolia flower. Simple, strong, Southern. He looked up, surprised. "You're sure?" Agnes smiled. "Son, when a woman loves you without needing to own you, and when she carries her kindness like a quiet fire, that's a woman worth holding on to." She patted his knee gently. "You've built buildings, companies, and plans bigger than I could imagine, but this is what your father would have wanted. A good woman. A simple life. A heart that stays." Daniel didn't speak. He just closed his hand around the brooch and nodded. Later that evening, as Grace stepped into the house with a peach cobbler she'd baked herself, nervous, hands shaking just a bit, Agnes met her at the door. No grand speeches, no dramatic music. Just a hug. Warm. Long. Steady. "Welcome home, sweetheart," Agnes whispered. And Grace, who had stood through grief, poverty, and long walks in silence, let her shoulders fall for the first time. Because this was what it meant to be accepted. No conditions. No caution, just love. The kind passed down through hands that had planted gardens and wiped away tears. The kind that didn't shout, but stayed. And for Daniel, watching the two most important women in his life finally meet, not across a desk or behind a register, but here in the heart of his home, he knew this was it. This was family. The wedding wasn't grand, but it was perfect. They held it in the backyard of the Franklin estate, under the big pecan tree that had stood there longer than anyone could remember. Agnes insisted on that tree, said it had seen every season, and now it would witness a new beginning. White chairs lined the lawn. Mason jars filled with wildflowers sat on every table. The smell of magnolia and fresh-cut grass danced in the warm breeze. The guest list was small. Just close friends, a few old neighbors, and every grocery clerk from the Polk Street store. Grace wore a simple ivory dress, no lace, no pearls, just fabric that moved like sunlight. Her hair was pinned up, soft curls falling at the nape of her neck. Daniel stood waiting at the altar, wearing his father's cufflinks and the kind of smile that only came once in a lifetime. As Grace walked down the aisle, arm in arm with Miss Agnes, time seemed to hush. There were no violins. Just the quiet strum of a single guitar, just the beating of hearts that had waited long enough. When they reached the altar, Agnes kissed Grace's cheek and whispered, "Make your life simple. Make your love loud." Daniel took Grace's hands like he'd been holding them in his dreams for years. The vows were short. They didn't need much. Because everything they needed had already been said, not in words, but in walks through the rain. In cups of sweet tea, in second chances and open doors. When the officiant said, "You may now kiss your bride," there wasn't a dry eye in the yard. Even Amma, standing like a sentinel near the hedge, wiped something from his eye and blamed it on the sun. The reception was filled with laughter, the kind of laughter that only comes after pain has been carried long enough. They ate brisket and cornbread, danced barefoot on the grass, and when the sky turned orange, Agnes stood to toast. She raised her glass and said, "To Grace, for bringing light back into our family, and to Daniel, for knowing how to recognize it." The crowd clapped. Grace cried. Daniel held her close, and in that moment, under a Texas sunset with fireflies flickering like tiny blessings, Grace Thompson, once a grocery clerk with no place to belong, stood as a wife, a daughter, and a woman fully seen. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness can grow into the greatest love. And sometimes, a $4 bottle of oil is all it takes to change everything. Some stories don't start with grand dreams or perfect plans. Sometimes, they begin with a leaky roof, a broken heart, and a $4 bottle of cooking oil. Grace never asked for recognition. She didn't post about her good deed. She didn't expect applause. She just saw someone hurting and helped. And in that quiet act, done without fanfare, without witnesses, she changed her life and the lives around her. You see, kindness isn't a performance. It's a choice. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's holding the door, paying for the stranger behind you, showing up even when your own world is falling apart, and sometimes the world notices. Not always with cameras or confetti, but with a door that opens, a table that's been waiting, a hand that reaches back. So if you're out there, wondering if the little things matter, let Grace's story remind you, they do. Every choice of compassion echoes farther than you know, and just maybe, your quiet kindness is the beginning of someone else's miracle. What would you have done if you were in Grace's shoes that day? Have you ever helped someone quietly, without expecting anything back, only to have life surprise you in return? Share your story in the comments, give this video a like, and tag someone who still believes in everyday kindness.